Um, hi, my name is Mia. I worked with Karthik Gopinath over the summer. He's a student at Harvard, and we worked on evaluating an brain image segmentation model. So just to give you guys kind of an introduction into like what all of this stuff is. So basically encompassing image segmentation is a field called computer vision, which is basically just a field of AI that kind of trains computers to think the way we do in regards to like how we perceive like the visual world. And then image segmentation is a specific technique that like kind of separates parts of an image and makes things easier to classify and analyze for both like the person watching and the AI. Um, and it's been being applied to like medical imaging to help identify things like cells and tumors, which is kind of hard to do like by eye. So this is just an example of like a regular MRI, which is on the left, and then brain image segmentation, which is are like the two pictures in the middle and on the right. So you can kind of see how segmentation it kind of like picks a part of the brain to focus on. As far as the difference between like ground truth and predicted segmentation, I'll get into that later. So our objective for our research was to analyze an automated multi-compartment brain segmentation algorithm, which is used for gliomas or like just tumors in the brain on MRI scans. So this is just like an overview of the methodology. I'll be going into more depth now, but basically we worked with the BRATS 2020 data set, which is kind of like a challenge where like people like share code and like evaluate these brain image segmentation models in order to like continue to improve them. So first what we had to do was acquire the data set. This looks like a bunch of random code, but it's necessary because we had to install like libraries, which basically allows us to like run the code in the first place, as well as we had to retrieve API, which is basically kind of like a set of rules for the software that we're downloading. And then we also had, after like retrieving the API, we downloaded the files and then unzip them, which basically kind of just like opening them, but in like computer terms, I guess. And we had to like go through the folder names because there was one that was like incorrect and made sure like all the folders match as to avoid like any coding errors. Next, we had to analyze the modalities and segmentations. So basically, like the modalities are like the picture on the bottom here. They're like different types of MRI scans. They're called T1, TICE, T2, FLAIR, and they're just like different ways to kind of examine the tumor. However, in order to like kind of make the process like a little faster and efficient, we excluded T1 as well as T2. T1 was excluded because TICE is kind of just like the better version of T1. And then T2 has like these kind of fluids that kind of convolute the image. So we found that like the most informative modalities were T1 and FLAIR. Next, we split data into three sets. This is training, validation, and test. The training set is used to, as it sounds, train the model, like exposing it to data about like image segmentation, like the different images. And then the validation set is kind of like determining the parameters of the model, what it can do, what it can't do, kind of just like augmenting its behavior. And then the test set is used later when we evaluate the model. So first we had to like actually give the model data to work off. However, we can't like actually do it directly. So we had to use a data generator as well as apply something called a one-hot encoder. So if you look at the image, you could see like that is the image like to the left is kind of like the raw data that it gives. But when you apply a one-hot encoding on it, it kind of breaks it down into different segments, which again is like making things just like easy to read, easy to look at. Um, yeah. Okay, this is the wordy slide, but we basically had to do something called define the model with something called UNet architecture, which is basically just like a neural network or like an AI that's known for like image segmentation, and that's kind of like trained to think like the brain almost. We decided to use a 2D unit because it's like faster and Core has less memory. And since we're working with like a pretty big data set, I believe it was like around 370 sets of data, we figured that using that, a 2D version would be better. And then we had to set like different metrics as to evaluate the performance, accuracy, IOU, sensitivity, and precision. So accuracy, of course, it looks at whether it's like, is this wrong or right, pretty much. IOU, it's basic, it measures the overlap between like the predicted and then the ground truth. And then I'll explain now that predicted is basically what the computer thinks, and then the ground truth is like what's actually going on, like which is determined by humans or like doctors. The sensitivity metric just measures like the proportion of like the pixels to make sure it's predicted correctly. So it's kind of like you know how like pictures are like different pixels. So it's kind of like measuring it by the pixel. So it's very, very specific. And then the precision metric also measures proportions, but this in this case is like the predicted rather than the ground truth. So after all that, we're finally able to like train the model. If you look at this graph here, it's called our accuracy graph. And it shows that like if you're looking at like the overlap between the red and the blue and how it's getting closer together, that means like the model is learning. And since it is learning, we can now use it to predict the segmentations in the data set. So a bunch more code, but basically we just use something called the evaluate function for to evaluate the performance of the model. And it ended up performing well on the data set. These are just like all, like if you look at the numbers on the bottom, like those are the different metrics that we set. And it kind of shows that basically these numbers are what are considered good for these different metrics. However, there are of course like room for improvement. Like we could have tried using 3D net and seeing what it like gave us, as well as like using a larger data set. So just a short overview, we had to first acquire the data set, analyze like the different modalities, split the data, and then feed the model more data. And it is seen to have performed well. And then, of course, as like this computer vision field continues to grow, there's always going to be a need to kind of reduce the errors of these models as to prevent any like poor patient care. Because of course, if like a model shows like a tumor that isn't there, and then like someone starts like receiving treatment for a tumor they don't have, obviously that's not a very good thing. So I just want to give a thank you to, of course, my mentor, even though he's not here, as well as Talaria for the opportunity and the slides I got from SlidesGo. And this is like the reference we use to do the data segmentation.